Her ex-husband took everything in the divorce, but he forgot the old machine shop her father hid in her name. What she discovered there wasn't just about rust and steel. It was about a second chance she never knew she had. If you've ever felt like you've lost it all, this story is for you. Stick around, and maybe share your own story in the comments below. Let's get into it. The last box was sealed. I pressed the flat of my palm against the brown cardboard, the tape still tacky under my fingers. It contained nothing of value. Old paperbacks, a chipped coffee mug from a forgotten vacation, a framed photo of my dog, Gus, who was now Mark's dog. The divorce decree had been very specific. The house was his. The furniture, the art, the joint savings account, all his. My contribution, the lawyers had argued, was intangible. Emotional labor, they called it, a currency with no exchange rate. I was left with my clothes, my personal effects, and a car that was 6 months away from needing a new transmission. And this box, this one sad box, the echo in the empty living room was a physical presence. It was the sound of a life being scooped out. For 10 years, this house had been a symphony of small noises. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the third stair, Mark's keyboard clacking away in his home office as he built the business I had supported. Now, there was only the hollow percussion of my own breathing. I looked around at the pale rectangles on the walls where our pictures used to hang, ghosts of a life I no longer recognized. It was strange how quickly a home could become just a house. It was just wood and drywall and wiring, a container I was about to be discarded from. I ran a hand along the dust-free mantelpiece. My cleaning habits had died hard. Even in the last week, knowing none of it would be mine, I had wiped down the counters, vacuumed the floors, polished the faucets. It was a compulsion, a need to maintain order even as my world spun into chaos. Mark had called it my nesting instinct. He'd said it with a smile, but it always felt like a label, a way to file me away in a neat little box labeled wife. Now the nest was empty, and the bird was being kicked out. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a harsh, unwelcome vibration against my leg. I almost didn't answer it. It could be Mark, calling to ask if I was gone yet, his voice polite but firm, the way you'd speak to a contractor who'd overstayed their welcome. But the name on the screen was Arthur Davies, my lawyer, a man whose voice had become the soundtrack to the worst year of my life. I slid my thumb across the screen. "Hello, Arthur, Anna," he said. His voice was dry, like rustling paper. "Just calling to check in. Have you vacated the premises? A legal term for being kicked out of your own life." "Almost," I said, my voice tight. "Just me and one last box of memories." He didn't want. There was a pause. I imagined him on the other end, sitting in his leather chair, surrounded by the tidy files of other people's broken lives. He was a good man, I thought, but he was insulated from the wreckage he managed. "I'm sorry, Anna. I know this is difficult. It is what it is," I replied, the phrase a shield I had learned to use. It meant everything and nothing. It meant I was drowning but didn't want to make a scene. "The final transfer of funds should be in your account by tomorrow," he continued. "All business now. It's not much, as you know, but it's what we could secure." Not much was an understatement. After paying Arthur's fees, I'd have enough to rent a room somewhere for a few months, if I was lucky. Enough to feel the full weight of my failure in slow motion. "Thank you, Arthur, for everything." I was ready to hang up, to sink into the quiet misery of the empty house for a few more minutes before I had to hand over the keys. "Wait, Anna," he said, a different tone in his voice. Something less practiced. "There is one other thing. It's a bit of an anomaly, and I wasn't sure if I should even mention it. It's likely nothing." I leaned against the wall, the cool plaster a shock against my skin. "What is it?" "While my paralegal was doing the final asset search, a property record flagged your name. Not a joint property with Mark. Just you. Anna Gable. Your maiden name." My heart gave a painful little thump. "I don't own any property. According to the county clerk's office, you do. It was transferred into your name 18 years ago, on your 18th birthday. A quitclaim deed. The taxes are minimal and have been paid automatically from a trust account that was set up at the same time. An account that still has a few $1,000s in it. By the way, my mind was a blank. 18 years ago. I was just out of high school. My father had been gone for 2 years, and my world was a blur of grief and confusion. "Who transferred it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Your father," Arthur said. "Michael Gable." The name hit me like a physical blow. My father. He had been a mechanic, a man of grease and steel, with hands that were calloused but gentle. He could fix anything, from a lawnmower engine to a broken heart. He died in a car accident when I was 16, a sudden, brutal amputation of my world. His affairs had been a mess. A small life insurance policy that barely covered the funeral, a mountain of debt from a business venture that had failed, and a mortgaged house we lost a year later. My mother had already passed years before, so I went into the system, a ward of the state until I aged out. The idea that he had left me something, hidden something away, felt impossible. That can't be right, I said. He had nothing. We lost everything. The records are clear, Arthur insisted. It's a commercial property. Lot 7, on the old industrial cul-de-sac off Route 4. The address is 14, Steelhead Drive. Does that mean anything to you? Steelhead Drive. The name was a ghost from a half-forgotten dream. It was where his shop was. Not the garage he worked out of at the end, but his first place. A place he'd lost, I thought, long before I was even born. A place he only ever mentioned in sad, whiskey-soaked stories about what could have been. I think so, I stammered. It was his old machine shop. But he sold it. He had to, apparently not, Arthur said. He transferred the deed to a holding company and then, years later, transferred it to you. It's yours, Anna. Free and clear. Mark and his lawyers never found it because it was in your maiden name and the tax payments were automated. It flew completely under the radar. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the polished hardwood floor, my last box beside me like a tombstone. A machine shop. An old, forgotten, probably derelict machine shop. What in God's name was I supposed to do with a machine shop? What's it worth? I asked, the question tasting like ash in my mouth. Hard to say without an appraisal, Arthur replied. The land in that area isn't prime, but it's not worthless. Developers have been sniffing around the old industrial parks. You could probably sell it for a quick 50, maybe 75,000. After taxes and fees, it would be a start. A real start, $50,000. It felt like $1 billion. It was a lifeline. It was an escape. It was a way out of the suffocating terror that had been my constant companion for the last year. I could move, start over somewhere new, somewhere Mark's shadow didn't loom over every street corner. I could breathe again. Anna, are you there? I'm here, I said, my voice thick with unshed tears. Thank you, Arthur. Thank you, don't thank me, he said, his voice softening. Thank your father. I hung up the phone and sat there in the echoing silence. My father, the man I had mourned for half my life. The man I thought had left me with nothing but memories. He had left me a secret. A rusty, forgotten, $50,000 secret. I looked at the box beside me, filled with the worthless fragments of a life with Mark. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt a flicker of something other than despair. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was something sharper, more dangerous. It was curiosity. I stood up, my knees cracking in the silence. I picked up the box. It felt lighter now. I walked out of the house for the last time, not looking back at the pale ghosts on the walls. I had a new ghost to chase. The drive to Steelhead Drive was a journey back in time. It was on the other side of the city, a place I hadn't been to since I was a child. The part of town that progress had forgotten, where the buildings sagged and the fences were laced with rust. As I drove, the sleek, modern architecture of Mark's world gave way to the blocky, utilitarian structures of my father's. Brick warehouses with smashed windows stared at me like hollow eye sockets. Weeds grew thick in the cracks of the pavement. This was a place of industry, but the industry was long dead. My car, a 10-year-old sedan that had seemed so shabby in the driveway of my former home, looked almost new here. I turned onto Route 4, the road my father used to take to work every day. I remembered sitting in the passenger seat of his old pickup, the vinyl cracked and hot against my legs, the air thick with the smell of gasoline and cheap coffee. He would point out landmarks, not mountains or rivers, but factories and workshops. See that place, Annie, he'd say, gesturing with his chin. They make the gears for the big mills. And that one over there? They temper the steel for the bridge supports. To him, this wasn't an ugly part of town. It was a living, breathing machine, and he knew how every part of it worked. Now, the factories were silent. The smokestacks were cold. The machine was broken. Steelhead Drive was less a street and more a paved suggestion. It was a short cul-de-sac branching off the main road, ending in a chain-link fence overgrown with ivy. There were only 4 buildings on the street, all of them in various states of decay. And there, at the very end, was Lot 7. It was smaller than I remembered, or maybe I was just bigger. The building was a simple, corrugated steel structure, the kind you could order from a catalog. The paint, once a cheerful barn red, had faded to a mottled, rusty pink. The large roll-up garage door was streaked with grime, and the smaller office door next to it had a sheet of plywood where a window used to be. A faded sign hung crookedly above the door, the letters barely legible, Gable and Son. My grandfather's name was Walter. He died before I was born. My father was the son. The sign was a lie he'd kept up his whole life, a tribute to a man he barely knew. It was a monument to a broken lineage. I parked the car, the crunch of gravel under the tires the only sound. I sat for a long moment, just looking at it. This was my inheritance. Not a house, not a stock portfolio, but this sad metal box. A place of failure. The place my father had lost, the failure that had haunted him, the one he never truly recovered from. And he had given it to me. Why? Was this some kind of cruel joke? A final lesson in disappointment? I got out of the car. The air smelled of damp earth and decay. Arthur had emailed me the information for the lockbox, which was supposedly attached to the gas meter. I found it, a small, gray metal box, caked in dirt. The combination was my birthday. Of course it was. The dials were stiff, but they turned. The box clicked open. Inside was a single, heavy, old-fashioned brass key. It felt cold and real in my hand. I walked to the office door. The lock was an old, heavy-duty deadbolt, the kind my father trusted more than any modern design. "They don't make 'em like this anymore," he would say. "This has guts." I put the key in the lock. It slid in smoothly, a perfect fit after years of disuse. I turned it. The bolt slid back with a loud, satisfying thud that echoed in the quiet street. I took a deep breath, my hand on the doorknob. What was I about to find? A collapsed roof? A squatter's den? A time capsule of my father's failure? I turned the knob and pushed. The door resisted, scraping against the floor. I put my shoulder into it and shoved it open just enough to squeeze through. I stepped inside. The air was thick and still, heavy with the scent of cold metal, stale oil, and dust. So much dust. It was a fine, gray powder that coated everything, softening the sharp edges of the machinery, turning the room into a monochrome photograph. Light filtered through the grimy windows of the main garage door, cutting bright shafts through the gloom. Dust motes danced in the beams like tiny, frantic ghosts. The office was a small, 10-by-10 room. There was a metal desk, a filing cabinet, and a single wooden chair. Everything was covered in that same layer of gray dust. A calendar on the wall was turned to July, 1998. The month he died. My breath hitched. This wasn't just a building, it was a tomb. It had been sealed on the day he died and left untouched for nearly 2 decades. I stepped further into the room, my boots leaving clean prints in the dust on the floor. On the desk, next to an old, black rotary phone, was a metal toolbox. It wasn't a mechanic's toolbox. It was smaller, more like a cash box. It was locked. I tried the key from the front door, but it didn't fit. Of course not. Nothing with my father was ever that simple. I looked around the office. The filing cabinet was locked, too. I pulled on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. I was tempted to find something to pry it open, to smash the locks, but I hesitated. This place felt sacred. A strange reverence held me back. This was his space, preserved exactly as he had left it. Vandalizing it felt like a desecration. My eyes fell on the calendar again. A picture of a soaring eagle above a mountain lake. Below the picture, in the box for July 17th, there was a single, handwritten note. A date circled in red ink. My 16th birthday. Below it, in my father's familiar, blocky script, were 4 numbers, 8-2-5-4. A combination. I looked back at the locked toolbox on the desk. It had a 4-digit combination lock. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was a test. A breadcrumb trail left for me to follow. I walked back to the desk, my movements slow, deliberate. I wiped the dust from the face of the lock. I spun the dials, the clicks loud in the dead air. 8, 2, 5, 4. I pulled the latch. It clicked open. I lifted the lid. Inside, there was no money. There was no deed, no hidden treasure. There was just a stack of envelopes, bound together with a faded rubber band. And on top of the stack, a single, smaller envelope with my name on it. Anna. My hands were shaking. I sat down in the dusty wooden chair, the wood groaning under my weight. I picked up the envelope. The paper was thick and yellowed with age. I turned it over. It was sealed. I carefully tore it open, my fingers clumsy. Inside was a single, folded sheet of paper. The handwriting was his. Unmistakable. My dearest Anna, it began. If you are reading this, then it means two things. First, it means I am gone. And for that, my girl, I am so sorry. I hope it was quick. I hope I didn't leave too much of a mess. Second, it means you found this place. I wasn't sure you ever would. I almost hope you don't. Because if you need this place, it means life hasn't been as kind to you as I always prayed it would be. I had to stop. A wave of grief, so powerful it felt like a physical force, washed over me. I pressed the letter to my chest, the sharp corners of the paper digging into my skin. I squeezed my eyes shut, but the tears came anyway, hot and silent, carving clean tracks through the dust on my cheeks. He was here. His voice, his words, right here in my hands. After all these years of silence, he was speaking to me. I cried for the 16-year-old girl who lost her father. I cried for the woman I had become, lost and alone in a different way. I cried for the love that had been hidden away in this dusty metal box, waiting for me. After a few minutes, the wave receded, leaving me exhausted and hollowed out. I took a ragged breath and unfolded the letter again. I had to keep reading. I had to know. I'm not good with words, Annie. You know that. I'm better with engines and gears. Things that make sense. But I have to try to explain. This shop, this was my failure. I lost it. Or at least, that's the story I told everyone, including you. It was easier that way. The truth is, I never lost it. I couldn't. It was the only thing I ever built that was truly mine. When your mother got sick, the bills they were a mountain we couldn't climb. I had offers to sell this place, good offers. But I couldn't let it go. So I did something else. I buried it. Legally, I mean. I sold it to a shell corporation for $1, took out a loan against that sale, and used the money to pay the doctors. Then, when the business went under, the bank couldn't touch the building itself. It was a dirty trick and probably not entirely legal, but it was all I could think of. I always meant to bring it back, to unwind the whole mess. But I ran out of time. I set it up so it would transfer to you on your 18th birthday. A secret safety net. I paid the taxes ahead for as long as I could, out of a little account I scraped together. I hoped you would go off to college, meet a good man, build a wonderful life, and never even know this place existed. I hoped you'd be so successful and happy that this rusty old box would be nothing more than a footnote in the county records. But I know life doesn't always follow the plan. Sometimes, the engine seizes up. Sometimes, the gears strip. And you need a place to pull over, to get out of the storm, to rebuild. If you are reading this, Anna, this is that place. It's not much. It's old and it's dirty. But it's yours. No one can take it from you. Sell it if you need to. Take the money and run. Lord knows you deserve an easy break. But before you do, look around. This place is good bones. It was built to last. Just like you. There's more you need to know. The rest of the letters in this box will explain things. Read them in order. Don't skip ahead. That's important. This is your story now, Annie. Do what you have to do. All my love, Dad. I read the letter 3 times, the words blurring and sharpening. A safety net. A place to rebuild. He hadn't left me with his failure. He had left me with his hope. He had seen a future for me that I couldn't see for myself, a future where I might be strong enough to stand on my own 2 feet. He hadn't trusted the world to be kind to me, so he had built me a shelter. I looked around the dusty office, at the silent, hulking shapes of the machines visible through the doorway to the main shop. It didn't look like a shelter. It looked like a ruin. But as I sat there, in his chair, holding his last words, a strange feeling began to bloom in my chest. It was the feeling of a key turning in a lock I didn't even know was there. The weight of my past, the divorce, the loss, the feeling of being utterly adrift, didn't disappear. But it shifted. It was no longer the only thing I could feel. Now, there was something else beneath it. A foundation. It was old and dusty and buried under years of neglect. But it was there. It had good bones. I picked up the stack of letters. The rubber band had grown brittle with age and snapped in my fingers. There were 5 more envelopes, each one numbered in his blocky script. 1 through 5. Read them in order. Don't skip ahead. I took the first one. It was thicker than the others. I slid my finger under the flap and pulled out a folded sheaf of papers. It wasn't a letter. It was a blueprint. The blueprint was for the shop itself, but it was different from the building I was sitting in. It was cleaner, more ambitious. There were notes in the margins, calculations, sketches of modifications. And in the bottom right corner, a title, Phase 2, My father, the man who I thought had given up on his dreams, had been planning an expansion. He had been planning a future. I spent the next hour poring over the papers, not just the blueprint, but old receipts, supplier catalogs, and pages torn from engineering manuals, all tucked inside that first envelope. It was a portrait of a man I barely knew. My father, the dreamer, the innovator. I'd always seen him as a simple mechanic, a man who fixed what was broken. But these papers told a different story. He wasn't just fixing things, he was designing them. There were sketches for a new type of high-efficiency hydraulic press, notes on a custom gearing system, ideas for a more durable alloy he was trying to create. It was all theory, of course, scrawls and numbers on paper. But the intelligence behind it, the ambition, was staggering. He wasn't just running a machine shop. He was trying to reinvent it. And he had failed. Or, more accurately, he had been interrupted. Life had gotten in the way. My mother's illness. The debt. My own childhood. His dreams had been sacrificed for us. The weight of that knowledge was immense. This wasn't just a building he had saved for me. It was a dream he had passed down. I moved on to the second envelope. Inside was a letter, shorter this time. Annie, if you're reading this, you've seen the plans. That was the dream. Maybe a foolish one. But a man's gotta have a dream, right? Now for the practical stuff. This place is a mess, I know. But it's not as bad as it looks. I winterized everything before I closed it up. The main machines, the lathe, the mill, the press. They're old, but they're good. American steel. I've drained the fluids, coated the moving parts in cosmoline. They'll need a thorough cleaning, but they should work. The power is off at the main breaker, but the account is still open, just dormant. You'll have to call the utility company. The number is in the filing cabinet. Which brings me to the next part of your scavenger hunt. I chuckled through a fresh wave of tears. A scavenger hunt. Of course. It was Soham. As a kid, he'd hide my birthday presents, leaving a trail of clues that would lead me all over the house. It drove my mother crazy, but I loved it. It made the gift feel earned. The key to the filing cabinet is in the one place in this shop I know is safe from everything, rust, time, even fire. It's in the heart of the beast. Go to the big hydraulic press in the main bay. On the right side, there's a maintenance panel held on by 4 hex bolts. You'll need a 9/16 wrench. There should be one in the top drawer of the workbench by the door. Find the key, Annie. Then we can talk about the money. My heart leaped. The money. I stood up, my body stiff from sitting. I walked out of the office and into the main shop. The space was cavernous. The ceiling was high, with steel rafters crisscrossing in the gloom. 3 massive machines dominated the floor, silent metal dinosaurs sleeping under blankets of dust. The air was colder out here. I could see my breath. I found the workbench he'd mentioned. It was a heavy, wooden table, its surface scarred with decades of work. The drawers were stiff. I pulled on the top one, and it opened with a screech of protest. Inside, nestled in a felt liner, was a set of pristine wrenches, each one in its designated slot. No dust. He had prepared this, too. I picked up the 9/16 wrench. It felt heavy and balanced in my hand, a tool made for a purpose. I walked over to the hydraulic press. It was a monster, a 10-foot-tall behemoth of steel and pistons. It was painted a dark green, the color of old army equipment. I found the maintenance panel, just where he said it would be. 4 hex bolts, coated in a light film of oil. I fit the wrench onto the first bolt. It was tight. I put my weight into it, and with a groan, it broke free. One by one, I loosened the bolts, my knuckles scraping against the cold steel. The last bolt came off, and I carefully lifted the panel away. Inside was a dark cavity, a tangle of wires and hydraulic lines. And there, hanging from a small hook on the inside of the panel, was another brass key. This one was smaller, a standard filing cabinet key. Attached to it was a small, metal tag, stamped with a number, 3. I took the key and went back to the office. It slid into the lock on the filing cabinet and turned easily. The top drawer slid open with a smooth, well-oiled glide. The contrast with the rest of the shop was jarring. This was not a place of decay. This was a place of careful preservation. Inside the drawer, There were no files. There was just a single, large manila envelope, sealed with wax. The number 3 was written on it in my father's hand. I took it back to the desk. This was it. The money. I imagined a stack of cash. Or maybe stock certificates. Something that would solve all my problems. I broke the wax seal and opened the envelope. It was full of documents. Bank statements for the trust account he had set up, showing the tax payments going out every year like clockwork. The original deed for the property. A copy of his will, which I'd never seen, leaving everything to me. And at the bottom, another letter. Envelope number 3. Annie, if you're here, you've proven you're not afraid to get your hands dirty. Good. You get that from me. Now, about the money. I'm sorry to tell you, there isn't a hidden fortune. I wasn't that clever, or that lucky. The money I had went to your mother's care, and to setting this place up for you. What I left you isn't a pile of cash. It's a choice. In this envelope, you'll find 2 things. The first is an offer from a company called Sterling Development. They wanted to buy this whole cul-de-sac a few years back. They'll be back. Their offer is fair. It's enough to set you up somewhere new. It's the easy way out. No one would blame you for taking it. It's probably the smart thing to do. The second thing is in the bottom of this drawer, taped to the underside. It's what's left of my emergency fund. It's not much, but it might be enough. Enough for a start. The choice is yours, Anna. You can sell this place, take the money, and walk away. Or you can stay. You can take that little bit of cash and try to bring this place back to life. You can try to finish what I started. I won't lie to you. It will be hard. It might be impossible. This world doesn't have much room for little places like this anymore. But this shop, it has good bones. And so do you. You are smarter than you think and stronger than you know. I saw it in you. Even when you were just a little girl, taking apart the toaster to see how it worked. Don't let anyone ever tell you you're not capable. Especially not yourself. Whatever you choose, know that I am proud of you. Know that I love you. Dad, my disappointment was a sharp, bitter pill. No fortune. Just an offer from a developer and a little bit of cash. The easy way out. It was so tempting. I could feel the pull of it, the siren song of a simple solution. Sell the shop, take the $75,000, and disappear. Start over. Forget this place, forget the divorce, forget everything. But then I looked at the letter in my hand. He believed in me. My father, who had seen me at my best and my worst, who knew my strengths and my weaknesses better than anyone, believed I could do this. He believed I had it in me to take this ruin and build something from it. He had left me not a treasure, but a challenge. A test of character. I reached into the now empty filing cabinet drawer. My fingers brushed against the smooth metal underside. And there it was. A small, flat object, held in place with yellowed strips of duct tape. I peeled the tape away. It was a small, tin box, the kind that used to hold fancy cigars. I opened it. Inside, nestled in cotton wool, were stacks of $100 bills. I counted them. $10,000. It felt like a fortune and nothing at the same time. It wasn't enough to retire on. It wasn't enough to solve all my problems. But it was enough. Enough for a start. I sat there for a long time, the cigar box in my lap, my father's letter on the desk in front of me. The silence of the shop pressed in on me. I could hear the whisper of the wind outside, the distant rumble of a truck on the highway. I thought about Mark. I thought about the life I had lost, the woman I had been. The woman who arranged flowers and hosted dinner parties and made sure her husband's shirts were always pressed. The woman whose contributions were intangible. What if I could build something tangible? Something real? Something made of steel and sweat and grit. Something that was all mine. The choice was clear. It had been from the moment I read his first letter. The easy way was not my way. Not anymore. I was my father's daughter. And this place, this broken down, forgotten, beautiful place, had good bones. It was time to get to work. I had 2 letters left, numbers 4 and 5. I decided to save them. They were for later, for when I needed them. Right now, I didn't need words. I needed action. I stood up and walked back into the main bay. I looked at the lathe, the mill, the press. My machines. My inheritance. My future. I didn't know the first thing about machining. I didn't know how to clean them, how to power them, how to make them work. But I knew how to learn. My father had taught me that. I found a broom in a corner, the bristles stiff and matted. I started to sweep. The dust rose up in a thick cloud, choking me, filling my eyes and my lungs. But I kept sweeping. With every stroke, I was clearing away not just the dust of 20 years, but the dust of my own inertia. I was sweeping away the ghost of the woman I had been, the woman who let things happen to her. I was making space for someone new. I worked for hours, until my arms ached and my back was screaming in protest. The sun began to set, sending long, orange fingers of light through the grimy windows. I had cleared a small island of clean concrete in the center of the shop. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It was a claim. This place is mine. As I leaned on the broom, catching my breath, my phone rang. I pulled it out of my pocket, my hand black with grime. The screen was cracked, but I could read the name. Mark. My heart seized in my chest. I hadn't spoken to him in weeks, not since the final court date. Our communication had been reduced to the sterile back and forth of lawyers. I let it ring, the cheerful, generic tune a jarring intrusion into the solemn quiet of the shop. It went to voicemail. I stood there, my hand shaking, waiting. A minute later, it buzzed again. A text message. I opened it. I'm glad you're finally out of the house. The keys are on the counter. I just wanted to let you know, my lawyers found something interesting. A property your father hid. I don't know what you think you're going to do with that old wreck, but my guys think I have a claim to half of it. Marital asset, you know. We'll be in touch. The air went out of my lungs. Marital asset. He was coming for this, too. He wasn't content with taking my past. He wanted to take my future. The rage that filled me was cold and pure. It was a clean, industrial-grade fury. He had underestimated me. He had always underestimated me. He saw me as a decorative object, an accessory to his life. He had never bothered to look deeper, to see the person underneath. He had no idea who I was. He had no idea what I was capable of. I looked at the phone in my hand, at his smug, entitled words. I thought about the $75,000 offer from the developer. The easy way out. I could sell the shop, give him half, and walk away with 37 grand and my freedom. It was the logical thing to do. It was the safe thing to do. But I was done with being logical and safe. I typed out a reply, my thumb jabbing at the screen. You forgot one thing, Mark. The shop isn't in my married name. It's in my real name. It's mine. And if you want it, you'll have to come and take it. I hit send. Then I blocked his number. And I went back to sweeping. The fight was just beginning. But for the first time in my life, I was ready for it. The next few weeks were a blur of motion. I cashed out the small trust account Arthur had found, which gave me another $4,000. With the $10,000 from my father's emergency fund, I had a war chest. It wasn't much, but it felt like a king's ransom. My first act was to find a place to live. I rented a small, furnished room above a bakery a few miles from the shop. It smelled perpetually of yeast and sugar, a comforting, wholesome scent that was the polar opposite of the oily, metallic tang of the shop. The landlady, a stout woman named Maria with flour permanently dusted on her apron, eyed my grease-stained clothes with suspicion, but took my deposit without comment. My days fell into a rhythm. I would wake before dawn, buy a coffee and a stale pastry from the day-old rack at the bakery, and walk to the shop. I spent the first week just cleaning. I bought overalls, heavy-duty gloves, and a respirator mask. I scraped away 20 years of hardened grime. I scrubbed floors. I washed windows. It was brutal, back-breaking work. Every night, I would collapse into my narrow bed, every muscle screaming, my hands raw and blistered. But every morning, I would wake up with a renewed sense of purpose. I was not just cleaning a building. I was reclaiming myself. With each layer of dirt I removed, I felt like I was shedding a layer of my old life, of the helplessness and despair that had clung to me for so long. The shop slowly began to reveal itself. Underneath the dust and grime, the machines were beautiful. They were monuments of American iron, built with a pride and craftsmanship that no longer existed. The lathe was a huge, green monster from the 1950s, its controls a symphony of polished chrome levers and dials. The milling machine was a newer, but still formidable, Bridgeport model. And the press, my father's beast, stood silent and powerful in the center of the room. I followed my father's instructions from the second letter. I bought gallons of degreaser and spent days cleaning the cosmoline off the moving parts, a sticky, resinous goo that fought me every step of the way. I found the old user manuals in the filing cabinet, their pages brittle and yellowed, and I read them at night in my little room until my eyes burned. I was a student again, and my father was my teacher. His notes were everywhere, tucked into the manuals, written on scraps of paper, even scribbled in chalk on the sides of the machines themselves. Check tension here. Go easy on this gear. It's touchy. Never, ever force it. It was a conversation across time. He was guiding me, helping me understand the language of these metal beasts. The day I called the power company was a milestone. The man who came out was old, his face a roadmap of wrinkles. He looked at the ancient breaker box with a sigh. Haven't seen one of these in a while, he said, shaking his head. You sure you want to turn this on? Could blow the whole grid. It's been maintained, I said, with more confidence than I felt. He gave me a doubtful look, but did his job. He threw the main switch. The lights flickered, hummed, and then came on, bathing the shop in a steady, fluorescent glow. It was like watching a body come back to life. Later that day, I stood in front of the lathe. I had cleaned it, oiled it, and read the manual a dozen times. My heart was hammering. This was the moment of truth. I took a deep breath and pressed the on button. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a low hum that grew into a powerful, steady whir, the motor kicked in. The chuck began to spin, slow and true. It was alive. I put my hand on the cold metal body of the machine, and I could feel the power vibrating through it. I laughed, a loud, joyful sound that echoed in the huge space. It worked. It actually worked. I spent the next few days bringing the other machines online. The mill, the drill press, the grinders. Each one came to life with the same reassuring hum of stored power. They were ready. The question was, what was I going to do with them? My father's plans for Phase 2 were ambitious and far beyond my abilities. I needed to start smaller. I needed a project. I found it in the fourth envelope, which I opened one evening after a particularly grueling day. Inside was not a letter, but a single, detailed schematic. It was for a small, simple tool, a custom-made vice grip with a specialized head for holding odd-shaped pieces of metal. At the bottom of the schematic was a note. Annie, this was the first thing I ever made in this shop that was my own design. It's not fancy, but it's useful. Every good mechanic needs one. Maybe you could make one, too, just to get the feel of the machines. The materials are in the steel rack by the back wall. It was a test. Another one of his loving, maddening tests. Could I follow a plan? Could I turn a drawing into a physical object? Could I make something real? I decided to try. The next morning, I found the bar of raw steel in the rack. I followed the schematic, measuring and marking it with a precision I didn't know I possessed. The first step was to cut it to length on the big bandsaw. I had never used a power tool bigger than a kitchen mixer. My hands were shaking as I clamped the steel in place and turned on the saw. The blade screamed to life, a terrifying, high-pitched whine. I slowly guided the steel into the blade. Sparks flew, a brilliant, terrifying shower of orange light. The noise was deafening, but I held my ground, my hands steady, feeding the metal into the hungry teeth of the saw. When it was done, I had a clean, straight cut. I had done it. I had taken the first step. The next steps were more complex, involving the lathe and the milling machine. My first attempts were clumsy failures. I cut too deep on the lathe, ruining a piece of steel. I misaligned the piece in the mill, and the cutting head chattered horribly, leaving a jagged, ugly scar. I wanted to scream, to throw the tools across the room. I felt the old frustration, the old feeling of inadequacy, creeping back in. I was an imposter. I was a party planner, not a machinist. What was I thinking? I sank onto a stool, my head in my hands, the smell of hot, ruined metal filling my nostrils. I was ready to give up, to call the developer, to take the easy way out. And then my eyes fell on the workbench. My father had welded a small steel plate to the side of it, and stamped into the plate were two words, "Try again." It was a message from him, a command. He knew I would fail. He knew I would get frustrated. And he knew I needed to be told to get back up. I took a deep breath. I threw the ruined piece of metal in the scrap bin. I got a new piece of steel from the rack. And I tried again. This time I was slower, more careful. I listened to the machines, to the sound of the cutting tool against the metal. I learned to feel the difference between a clean cut and a forced one. It took me a week of long days and frustrating nights, a week of small cuts and tiny adjustments. But finally, I had all the pieces. I assembled them on the workbench, my hands trembling with anticipation. The joints fit perfectly. The screw mechanism turned smoothly. I had made a tool, a real, solid, steel tool. I held it in my hand. It was heavy and a little rough around the edges, but it was perfect. It was the first thing I had ever built with my own two hands. I had turned a piece of raw material into something useful, something with a purpose. And in doing so, I had done the same thing to myself. As I stood there, admiring my handiwork, a shadow fell across the open bay door. I looked up. A man was standing there, silhouetted against the bright afternoon sun. He was tall and thin, dressed in a sharp suit that looked completely out of place in this gritty, industrial landscape. "Anna Gable?" he asked, his voice smooth and polished. "My name is Peterson. I'm from Sterling Development. I believe you've been expecting me." The fight had come to my door. I put the vice grip down on the bench. I wiped my greasy hands on my overalls. "I've been expecting you," I said, my voice steady. "Come on in." He stepped inside, his expensive leather shoes crunching on the stray metal shavings on the floor. He looked around the shop, his expression a mixture of pity and disdain. It was the same look Mark used to give my thrift store finds. "Quite the place you have here," he said, a note of condescending humor in his voice. "A real fixer-upper. I like it," I said, crossing my arms over my chest. "It has good bones." He gave a tight, professional smile. "I'm sure it does. Listen, Ms. Gable, I won't waste your time. My company is acquiring this entire block for a new logistics and distribution center. We've already secured the other 3 properties. You're the last holdout." "I'm not holding out," I said. "I'm working." He raised an eyebrow, gesturing vaguely at the machines. "Right. You're a business. Look, we're prepared to make you a very generous offer. $100,000 for the property as is. You sign the papers, and you can walk away from this project with a nice little nest egg. No more mess, no more fuss." The offer had gone up. $100,000. It was a life-changing amount of money. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. I could buy a small condo, get a new car, go back to school. I could have a normal life. For a moment, I wavered. The sheer, gravitational pull of that money was immense. It was the easy way out, on a silver platter. But then I looked at the vice grip I had just built. I looked at the machines I had so painstakingly brought back to life. I thought of my father's words. "You are stronger than you know." This wasn't just a property. It was my father's legacy. It was my future, and it wasn't for sale. "Thank you for the offer, Mr. Peterson," I said, my voice calm and firm. "But the answer is no." He blinked, genuinely surprised. He clearly wasn't used to being told no. "I don't think you understand, Ms. Gable. This isn't a negotiation. That's our final offer. The project is moving forward, with or without you. We can make this easy, or we can make it very, very difficult. We can tie you up in zoning challenges and eminent domain proceedings for years. You'll spend every penny you have on lawyers, and in the end, you'll lose. This is your one chance to walk away with something." It was the same tactic Mark had used. Bullying, veiled in the language of reason. "I'm not selling," I repeated. His friendly facade dropped. His eyes turned cold. "You're making a big mistake," he said, his voice flat. "A very big, very expensive mistake. Your ex-husband seems to think so, too. He's been very cooperative. He understands business, so that was it." Mark had sold me out, pointed the developers in my direction, probably for a finder's fee. The last, bitter betrayal. "My ex-husband doesn't have a say in the matter," I said. "This is my property, and I'm asking you to leave it." He stared at me for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then he turned and walked out, his footsteps sharp and angry on the concrete. I watched him get into a sleek, black car and speed away. I was alone again in the quiet of the shop, but I wasn't scared. I was terrified. What had I just done? I had just turned down $100,000 and declared war on a powerful development company. I was out of my mind. I walked back to the office and sank into my father's chair. I needed guidance. I needed him. I opened the desk drawer and took out the last envelope. Number 5. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely open it. Inside was the last letter. "My dearest Anna, if you are reading this, it means you chose the hard way. It means you told the developers to go to hell. I knew you would. It's in your blood. You're a fighter, just like your mother was. I am so proud of you, my girl. More than you can ever know. Now, for the last piece of the puzzle. I told you I wasn't a clever man, but I told you one lie. I did leave you something more than just this shop. I couldn't leave you cash. It could be taken, or lost, or spent. So I left you something better. I left you an ace in the hole. Go to the milling machine. Raise the cutting head all the way to the top. On the underside of the main casting, you'll find a small, welded plate. It looks like a repair. It's not. It's a hidden compartment. The combination is the year your mother was born. You'll know what to do with what's inside. This is it, Annie. The end of the scavenger hunt. The rest is up to you. Build something good. Build something that lasts. Build a life you are proud of. I will always be with you. Love, Dad. I ran out to the milling machine, my heart pounding like a drum. I cranked the handle, and the heavy cutting head rose slowly, revealing the underside of the massive iron casting. And there it was, a small, square plate, seamlessly welded into the body of the machine, painted the same color, almost invisible. On the plate were 4 small, unmarked dials. The combination. My mother's birth year. 1956. I spun the dials. A faint click. The plate popped open on a hidden hinge. Inside the small, hollowed-out compartment was a thick, waterproof pouch. I pulled it out. My hands were slick with a mixture of sweat and oil. I opened the pouch. Inside were several official-looking documents, bound with a paperclip. They were patents. 3 of them, all filed in my father's name. One was for the high-efficiency hydraulic press he had sketched out in his plans. Another was for the custom gearing system. And the third, the most recent one, was for a new type of lightweight, high-strength metal alloy. The very thing he had been working on when he died. These weren't just ideas on paper. They were registered, protected intellectual property. They were valuable. And at the bottom of the pouch was a business card. It belonged to a patent lawyer in the city, a man named Frank Miller. On the back of the card, my father had written a note. Frank is a good man. He helped me file these. He knows what they are worth. He can be trusted. It was my father's final gift. Not money, not a weapon, a shield. Sterling Development could fight me over the land. They could try to use eminent domain, but they couldn't take this. These patents were a separate asset, a business in and of themselves. A business I now owned. I had a choice. I could use these patents as a bargaining chip, a way to force a better settlement out of Sterling. Or I could do something bolder. I could do what my father never got the chance to do. I could build them. I could turn his designs into reality. Right here, in his shop. The next morning, I called Frank Miller. His voice was old and kind. He remembered my father well. Michael Gable, he said, a note of fondness in his voice. He was a brilliant man, a true original, ahead of his time. I always wondered what happened to those patents. I'm glad they're in good hands. I spent the next year in a battle on 2 fronts. By day, I was in the shop, learning, practicing, honing my skills. I started small, making custom tools for local mechanics and contractors. The vice grip I had made was my first product. I made a dozen more, and they sold out in a week. Word got around. The girl in the old Gable shop, she does good work. I wasn't just surviving. I was building a reputation. By night, I was a warrior. With Frank Miller's help, I fought Sterling Development at every turn. They filed zoning challenges, claiming a heavy industrial business was no longer permitted in the area. We countered, proving the shop was grandfathered in. They sent inspectors, who nitpicked every detail of the building, from the wiring to the plumbing. I used the money I was making to fix every single violation, working late into the night to bring everything up to code. They tried to sue me, claiming my business was a nuisance. We countersued for harassment. It was a war of attrition, designed to bleed me dry. And it almost worked. There were times when I was down to my last $100, when I thought I would have to sell. But every time I was about to break, a new order would come in, or an old mechanic would show up and press a few $100s into my hand for a job I'd done, telling me to keep fighting the good fight. I wasn't alone. I had a community. And then, Frank Miller played my father's ace. We filed an injunction against Sterling's development plan, claiming that their proposed logistics center, with its heavy truck traffic and vibrations, would interfere with the precision work required to develop my father's patented alloy. We argued that my business had the potential to bring high-tech manufacturing jobs to the area, a far greater public good than a low-wage warehouse. It was a long shot, but it worked. A judge, intrigued by the story of a daughter resurrecting her father's legacy, granted a temporary injunction. Sterling Development was stopped dead in its tracks. A week later, Mr. Peterson came back. He didn't wear a suit this time. He wore slacks and a polo shirt. He didn't look arrogant. He looked tired. He found me in the shop, standing in front of the hydraulic press, my father's plans spread out on the workbench. "You win," he said, without preamble. "What do you want?" I looked at him, and I didn't feel anger or triumph. I just felt calm. I want to be left alone, I said. I want to build my business. And I want you to replace the fence at the end of the cul-de-sac. It's an eyesore. He stared at me, then let out a short, sharp laugh. The fence. And I want you to repave the street, I added. It's full of potholes. He shook his head in disbelief. That's it. You have me over a barrel, and you want me to fix the road? It's my road, I said. And I want it fixed, he agreed. The lawsuits were dropped. The new fence went up the next week, and a month later, a crew came and laid down a fresh, smooth layer of blacktop on Steelhead Drive. Sterling Development redesigned their project, building it a mile down the road. They left my little cul-de-sac, my little island of industry, in peace. It's been 5 years since that day. The shop is no longer quiet. The hum of machinery is a constant, steady heartbeat. I have 2 employees now, young apprentices from the local trade school, eager to learn the craft. We don't just fix things anymore. We build them. We manufacture the components for my father's patents, selling them to aerospace and medical device companies. Gable and daughter, the new sign says. It's a good business. A business that lasts. I never became a millionaire. I still drive an old car, and I live in a small apartment, though it's a bit bigger than the room above the bakery now. The money was never the point. The point was the work. The point was the building. The point was taking something broken and making it whole again. I sometimes walk through the shop at night, after the employees have gone home. The air still smells of oil and metal, but now it's the smell of creation, not decay. I run my hand over the cool, solid bodies of the machines, my machines, and I feel a profound sense of peace. My father gave me more than a building. He gave me more than his patents. He gave me a map back to myself. He knew I would get lost. He knew I would fall. And he left me a trail of breadcrumbs, not to lead me to a treasure, but to lead me back to my own strength, my own capabilities, my own heart. He taught me that the most valuable inheritance isn't something you're given. It's something you build. And what I've built here, in this old, rusty, beautiful machine shop, is more than a business. It's a home. It's a life. And it's all mine. This whole journey started because I lost everything. Or at least, I thought I did. But sometimes, losing everything is the only way to find what truly matters. It's the only way to clear out the debris and find the foundation that's been there all along. Have you ever been through something like that? A moment that felt like an ending, but turned out to be a beginning in disguise? I read all the comments, and I've learned that so many of you have your own stories of resilience, of finding a hidden strength you never knew you had. Share it below. Your story matters. It might be the sign that someone else needs to see, the permission they need to pick up their own tools and start building again. Because we all have good bones. Sometimes, we just need to be reminded of it. If these are the kinds of stories you want to see, stories about real people finding their way through hard times, then hit that subscribe button. Join this community. We're all in this together, just trying to build something that lasts. Thanks for listening. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do.